question isn't whether Miquella was cursed, it's whether that curse was ever meant to be broken. Because the deeper you follow his actions, the more it starts to look intentional. Remember that. It matters later, because somewhere along the way, we started believing that Miquella was different, kinder, safer, untouched by the cruelty that defines the rest of the demigods. He builds while others destroy. He heals while others spread rot. He turns away from the golden order instead of enforcing it. And because of that, he's often treated as something the world of Elden Ring rarely allows, an exception. But that assumption doesn't hold up for long, because the deeper you follow his actions, the more deliberate they become. Not just acts of compassion, but acts of design, structured, controlled, intentional, and eventually, a pattern starts to form, not one of rebellion, but of inheritance. Something wasn't just wrong with Miquella. Something was decided for him long before he ever began to act, and it shows. And that world was built by one hand, a single will that decided what belonged and what didn't. And that world was built by one hand. She did not balance the world. She edited it, removed what she could not control, and called what remained order. The golden order is not built by addition. It is built by removal. Destined death is taken out of the system, cut away, sealed, denied its place in the natural cycle. And in doing so, reality itself becomes controlled, stable on the surface, but fundamentally incomplete. Life continues. But it no longer resolves, and that imbalance doesn't stay contained. It spreads. The demigods are not born into a neutral world. They inherit that fracture. Each of them carries something that does not belong, not as punishment, but as consequence. One is consumed by rot, another is trapped in death without dying, and one never grows. Not fully, not naturally, not completely. These are not isolated curses. They are symptoms of a system altered at its core, a world where something essential has been removed, and nothing that follows can truly be whole. Miquella's answer to that broken world is not rejection, it's construction. He doesn't lash out like the others. He doesn't wage war, doesn't claim dominion through force. Instead, he begins to build something parallel, something quieter. Unalloyed gold is the first sign of it, an attempt to create a substance untouched by external influence, not just resistant, but pure, a controlled material in a world defined by corruption. And then, the Haligtree, not a symbol, but a functioning alternative, a place meant to grow outside the influence of the Erdtree, a new center, a new system, one that gathers the rejected, the afflicted, the unwanted, and gives them structure. Even his devotion to Millennia follows this pattern. He doesn't abandon her to the rot. He studies it, works against it, tries to contain what the world could not, and eventually, he turns inward. The cocoon is not an escape. It's a process, a deliberate withdrawal from the world as it exists in order to emerge as something else. Not reacting, designing, but the deeper you look, and the less this resembles compassion and the more it resembles method. Because nothing Miquella does is uncontrolled. Unalloyed gold is not just a cure, it's a filtration, a way of stripping away influence until only something singular remains. Not balanced, refined. The Haligtree follows the same logic. It doesn't integrate with the world. It replaces it, a closed system, grown from a single source, sustained by a single will. Even his attempts to heal aren't about coexistence. They're about removal. Rot is not negotiated with, it's pushed out. Influence is not managed, it's denied. Every problem is met with the same answer. Take something away until the system stabilizes. And then there's the self. Because when that same logic turns inward, it doesn't stop. It continues, piece by piece, until identity itself becomes something that can be divided, reduced, and controlled. Not chaos, not rebellion, a process. If this is new to you, if you're only now starting to see how deep Marika's logic runs through everything in this world, this channel exists for exactly that. Every video here follows one thread: what Marika built, what it cost, and what it left behind. Subscribe if that's the kind of question you can't leave unanswered, because we're not done yet. There's one part of Miquella that doesn't fit cleanly into the rest, because if everything is control, then why split it all? Saint Trina isn't just an alias, it's a separation, a version of Miquella that exists apart from him, tied not to action, but to sleep, to stillness, to a kind of influence that works without force. People don't resist Saint Trina, they surrender, and that matters, because it introduces a different kind of control, not through structure, and not through removal, but through quiet submission, a presence that doesn't command, yet still overrides. And then there's the body, left behind, sealed within the cocoon, not discarded, not destroyed, just abandoned at a specific moment in the process, like something shed or something outgrown, which raises a question the rest of his actions avoid. If Miquella can divide himself this cleanly, then what exactly is left at the center? And more importantly, what was removed to make that possible? It lingers. At a certain point, the pattern stops being subtle, because every step Miquella takes begins to echo something older, not in outcome, but in structure, a world reshaped by removing what doesn't belong, an identity divided to serve a larger design, a system built not on balance, but on control. And suddenly, his actions stop feeling new, and they feel familiar. This isn't a rejection of what came before, it's a refinement of it, cleaner, quieter, more deliberate. Where others inherited a broken system and suffered under it, Miquella studies it, rebuilds it, strips away its instability and keeps the parts that work, not to escape it, but to perfect it. And that's where the shift happens, because if the method is the same, then the difference isn't in ideology, only in execution. And that realization doesn't open a path forward, it closes one completely. Because none of this begins with Miquella, the removal of destined death, the construction of a controlled order built on subtraction. It was done before, deliberately, systematically, and it reshaped the world. Marika, not as a distant figure, but as the architect of the very logic Miquella now follows. And Miquella does the same, not by copying her decisions, but by inheriting the method itself. The idea that perfection is not achieved by adding, but by taking away. And if that's true, then his transformation isn't a rebellion, it's continuity. Because the system didn't fail, it adapted, and it learned to become something softer, something more convincing, something that no longer needs to declare control, because it already has it. And this time it wears a gentler face. Marika doesn't need to return, not when something else is already finishing what she started. And that's the part that's hardest to accept, because it means Miquella was never standing outside the system. He was shaped inside it. Every act of kindness, every attempt to heal, every step towards something better, built on the same foundation, the same assumptions, the same quiet decision that something in the world had to be removed for it to function, not questioned, not resisted, accepted, and refined. So when he begins to shed himself, his body, his lineage, his ties to the Golden Order, it doesn't break the pattern, it fulfills it. Because this is what that logic leads to when it's taken to its cleanest form. Nothing extraneous, nothing uncontrollable, nothing that resists design, not even the self. And at that point, the difference between creator and successor starts to disappear, not because one replaces the other, but because they arrive at the same conclusion, independently, inevitably. Marika is no longer a figure in the past. She becomes a direction, a process. Subscribe if that's the kind of question you can't leave unanswered, because once you start seeing it, you don't stop. Something that continues, even without her. And Miquella doesn't escape that. He completes it. So go back to the question planted at the start. Is the curse ever meant to be broken? Look at where his path leads. To division, to removal, to control refined into something almost unrecognizable. What we're witnessing isn't escape, it's succession. And if the system can produce something like him, something kinder, softer, more precise, then maybe it never needed to force obedience in the first place. Maybe it only needed time to become something no one would want to resist. So when Miquella finally reaches the end of that path, when nothing remains but intention, what exactly is left of him? And what at that point is he becoming? Is he